Renewed sectarian violence in western Myanmar. Buddhist rioters stand accused of attacking Muslims in Rakhine State, even as the government says it has a zero-tolerance approach to religious violence. But is the government really capable or even willing to end the unrest? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jane Dutton. A new target in Myanmar's ethnic violence, this time the Kamans, another Muslim minority group. They too, the victims of widespread ethnic tensions with the country's Buddhists. At least 240 people have been killed in fighting between Buddhists and Rohingya Muslims since June last year, and around 140,000 people have been driven from their homes. Rohingya Muslims have been described by the United Nations as virtually friendless. And attacks against Muslims are now overshadowing the widely praised political reforms that led to the end of military rule in 2011. So much so that President Thein Sein made a rare visit to the region on Tuesday. Let's hear what he had to say.
Our international reputation was damaged by the violence, but our explanation to the United Nations and to other countries in the region convinced them to understand us. The most important thing is we shouldn't allow these things to happen again.
Well, let's bring in our guests. In Kuala Lumpur, Mwang Zani, visiting fellow at the LSE and specialist on Burmese affairs. In New York, Debbie Stoddard, she's the coordinator of ASEAN Burma. That's the alternative ASEAN network on Burma Human Rights Network. Debbie, update us on the attacks and the commands and the impact and the fallout that's had.
This latest wave of violence began on the 29th of September, just one day after the director of the president's office put online inflammatory comments. In this latest case, the authorities did not step in. In fact, they seem to have simply stood by while Buddhists killed a 94-year-old Muslim woman and torched 80 households. And this latest wave of violence was sparked by a complaint by a Buddhist man that he had been insulted in a Muslim shop. This is not the first time that Tandwe or Sandwe has been targeted. In June, local residents also torched Muslim houses over a rumored rape.
I mean, that's the frightening thing about this violence, is how easily it's sparked over, in some instances, very small cases.
It appears that this whole situation is at a tinderbox level. The situation in Rakhine State and actually in all of Burma has been escalated to a point where people are extremely paranoid, people are on a knife edge, and all it takes is one cleverly placed rumor or a random event to spark the violence. And the authorities are also responsible for this, because one of the most notorious people online inciting hatred and violence against Muslims is Yetud, who uses the pen name Muzo, and he is a director of the president's office and also functions as the president's spokesman.
I mean, that's quite an extraordinary claim, isn't it? Do you agree with that? Do you go with that, Zani?
Well, I would even go further to state that, the violent waves that have struck both the Rakhine State or Rakhine province of Western Burma last year, as well as this past weekend's events, actually, including yesterday and Monday, they seem to be essentially condoned by the state at the highest level of the leadership. I say this because, there is a communal or sectarian violence to the violent events that have unfolded since last year, June of 2012. But more importantly, and I would emphasize this, the state in Burma, still firmly in the hands of the Ministry of Defense and the generals and ex-generals, have either stood by as the violent events unfolded, or in many cases, security forces have participated in the programs against first Rohingyas and then later Muslims of different ethnic groups. So this is not a part and parcel of Burma's democratic transition, as has been falsely described or characterized by groups like the International Crisis Group. And so I think that what is more important is to keep, to actually look at who really is behind these violent waves. And, you know, you could not have a simple acts of, like, you know, say two people arguing in a marketplace, or, you know, at a goldsmith's shop, sparking you know, massive waves of violence that claim the lives of hundreds and you know, displace over 150,000 people. This is not simply communal violence that has been unleashed as a result of political transition. There is something else going on, and that is
obviously
the,
we'd like
the state's involvement
to
here.
put these claims to the government, and we obviously did try to get somebody on the story, but we were not able to do that. I just wanted to make a note of that, because you are making a lot of claims. What you're saying is that the government, certainly the military, is complicit in so much of this violence. I mean, Debbie, a ceasefire was supposed to be in place in parts of the country. That hasn't held. Do you think Thein Sein has control of the military?
I think it's important to note and to take on what Mongzani has said, that one of the key beneficiaries of this anti-Muslim violence is President Thein Sein himself. He has enjoyed a surge in popularity since the violence broke out last year, because he's been able to rebrand himself as the man defending Buddhist Burma from Muslim invasion. So what we're seeing also domestically is Thein Sein having to strike a balance between exploiting anti-Muslim violence to shore up his own popularity in the lead up to the 2015 election, and also trying to stave off international pressure and criticism. So that's one dynamic that we need to understand. And the other dynamic is about the economic dimensions and who benefits economically from all this violence.
Okay, I'm going to pick that point up a little later, Debbie, but I just want to bring in something that I thought was quite interesting. When we covered the story in May, Myanmar's President Thein Sein had just made an historic visit to the US, and let's listen to the pledge he made then.
We must forge a new and more inclusive national identity. Myanmar people of all ethnic backgrounds and all faiths, Buddhists, Christian, Hindu and other, must feel a part of this new national identity. We must end all forms of discrimination, and we must ensure that not only intercommunal violence is brought to a halt, but that all perpetrators are brought to justice.
Well, 6 months later, and the violence the president promised to stop has continued unabated. Myanmar's foreign minister spoke to the media on Tuesday in New York to try to explain how the country is dealing with the problem.
The state of Rakhine, I think it is still under the state of emergency. So the government will take all necessary measures to stop that kind of violence. So what this is portraying about the law enforcement or the government troops are doing nothing is not true. I think it will not. The government will never tolerate that kind of communal violence to happen again. That was very clearly stated by the president. So we will take necessary measures to stop that kind of violence. There were some grievances in the past between these two communities. So we need some time to digest this kind of grievances and then to build confidence among the two communities. But the situation is still very sensitive.
Zani, let's first talk about the comments made by the president. I mean, in 6 months, very little has changed. Well, I'm wrong. The numbers have grown of the amount of people who've died.
Well, I think, you know, what is most important here is to highlight the gap between the words coming from either President Thein Sein himself or his foreign minister or his administration as a whole, and the deeds of the government. And I'll tell you, I came from a very extended military clan in Burma, and I grew up there. I lived there, and I worked with 3 different heads of military intelligence services in the country between 2004 and 2008. And my research is 100% focused on how the military processes, political issues, what type of propaganda they spread across the populations. And what is very clear is we have a government in power, and in which I think, like in the introduction, you described them as basically civilian government that came after the end of the military rule. The fact of the matter is, the military rule has not ended. It has refashioned itself as a quasi-civilian government. And let me tell you this. President Thein Sein met with the head of the United Nations Commission for Refugees last July. And here is the man, Thein Sein himself, proposing mass expulsion of Rohingyas to a third country or whoever else, or build apartheid, in the Rakhine state. And then that created a major international backlash. So he backpedaled and then started assuming the humanitarian persona. And that's why I said we need to tease out, what is the government's rhetoric from what actually is doing on the ground. What actually is doing on the ground is basically, being complicit in the pogroms against the Muslims. No longer just, Rohingyas.
Okay, Debbie, the president also said that no number of police or military can completely stop the violence. It has to come from the people. So is he admitting that the military, the police, are not able to provide any sort of security to the Muslims in particular? And if he says they've got to work this out, what tools has he given them to work this out? Where's the forgiveness here?
I think we need to understand that President Thein Sein is basically giving himself an excuse for not ensuring that security forces do their job. Arakan state is in a state of emergency. That means there is a very high military and security presence in the country, in that state. In fact, the problem is that the security forces have been inflicting violations on Rohingya in the IDP camps and elsewhere. And this is a fundamental problem of impunity affecting all of Burma. These atrocities start from the security forces, and the local population is encouraged to also be involved because they know very well they are not going to be caught, they are not going to be punished. So this is something that we need to understand, that the violations going on, Rohingya have been killed, women, Rohingya and Muslims have been raped in custody as in the past few months alone, and these are done by security forces.
All right.
What we're seeing in Arakan state, in other parts of Burma, is state-sanctioned mass atrocities.
Okay, let's take a quick look at the extent of this problem and these attacks on Muslims in the country. This is Rakhine State in western Myanmar, where most of the Muslim minority live. And this is the area where more than 70 houses were burnt down by rioters on Tuesday, home to the Kamans, another Muslim minority. But over the past year, Rohingyas have been attacked in other parts of the country too. Muslims account for around 4% of Myanmar's 60 million population, but many of them are thought of as illegal immigrants by the government, and some of them don't hold citizenship. Zani, we touched on a little earlier, and I think it was you, about the international community and the role that they have? I mean, could they really be doing more? And what about the companies who are operating in Myanmar now? Many of those companies are operating in areas that are affected by this violence.
Yeah, I mean, like, to answer your question in a somewhat roundabout way, I think we have to, like, you know, ask the international community to really stare at the nature of the violence there. It is not just simply isolated or even, like, you know, like a widespread type of, like, mass atrocities backed by the state. We need to tease the Rohingya issue out from the larger anti-Muslim violence. The Rohingyas have been subject to a process, not just a single event, a process that can only be described as genocide. And they have been targeted since 1978. You know, waves after waves of, you know, the anti-Rohingya violent operations have been carried out, you know, between 1978 and now. And, you know, more than, I say, like 500,000 Rohingyas have been forced out of the country into different, you know, third countries, and including the neighboring Bangladesh. So the question we need to ask is, you know, right in front of our eyes, we have a process that has been going on for 35 years, and the process that can only be framed as genocide by the state itself. But why is the international community, including Western democratic governments, shying away from, you know, calling this process by its proper name, genocide of the Rohingya?
Okay, let's put that to Debbie.
That leads us to the question of...
From a human rights point of view, excuse me jumping in, from a human rights point of view, I mean, do you agree this is a genocide? And if it is, why the international community is so hands-off?
I think the international community has been largely apathetic over the situation of Rohingya and Muslims in Burma because the regional community has not wanted to take responsibility. ASEAN itself, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations itself, has not wanted to take responsibility or speak up on the Rohingya because by acknowledging the genocide-like conditions that they're subjected to and the fundamental injustice that they're facing, ASEAN will have to take responsibility for Rohingya boat people and asylum seekers.
But it's already affecting them, isn't it? I mean, Thailand, for example, has had to bring in thousands. Many of them are now heading to Malaysia. And of course, we know that tens of thousands die on these hazardous trips.
That's the concern, that the international community has been feeling very comfortable seeing this as a one-off issue, as a small issue in Burma, when this apathy has allowed this situation to get out of control. And I think it's absolutely important to also acknowledge that this is the only case that we know of in recent history where an entire ethnic group have had their citizenship taken away from them. Rohingya were citizens of Burma. They had the citizenship taken away from them, and that in itself is a fundamental violation of human rights.
Zani, somebody else who agrees, sorry, let me just pose this to Zani, somebody who doesn't agree that the Rohingyas are citizens as well is Aung San Suu Kyi. She's a Nobel Peace Prize winner. She's a leader of the opposition. How detrimental, if it is detrimental, is her stance on the Rohingya Muslims?
Well, you know, like I share a panel discussion with her and several other speakers at the London School of Economics June last year when she first came out of the country. And, you know, the panelists or co-panelists were informed that she was in a listening mode. And, you know, we were actually quietly informed by the sources in the British Foreign Office that she was unprepared to address the issue of Rohingya. So I was actually given the question about the Rohingya statelessness sitting, you know, seated next to her, about 12 inches away. I was addressing the Rohingya issue. And the fact is, you know, she has been a total failure morally, intellectually, politically on the issue of Rohingya. When she was confronted with the reporters in Geneva at the ILO press conference which she held, prior to arriving in London, she was asked if she thinks or she knows whether the Rohingyas are citizens of Myanmar. And her answer was incomprehensibly, I don't know. The fact is, there is a mountain of documentation indicating that the Rohingyas were citizens of Burma. In fact, not only were they citizens of Burma, they were officially recognized by 4 successive governments since 1955.
Okay, let me bring Debbie in here, if I may.
Nationality of Burma. And so I think like this is, her stance has been a complete harm to the Rohingya cause.
Debbie, do you think she could make a difference?
I think Aung San Suu Kyi could make a difference, and she has spoken out in a very soft way, without naming the Rohingya, about the need for all people to be afforded protection and for international human rights standards to be applied to every situation. The reality in Burma now is that the Thein Sein's administration has whipped up so much hatred against Rohingya that if any politician stood up and said the word Rohingya, Rohingya, Rohingya in the parliament, that person would be lynched. If Aung San Suu Kyi came out and said very clearly that she was in favor of the rights of Rohingya people, she would be committing political suicide, and we have to acknowledge that.
It's sadly all about politics then. Let's talk about the Buddhists and the violence that some of them are affected by. I mean, do they have a right to be frightened if they are indeed frightened about the Muslims? Many of them say that there are just too many of the Muslims. They're feeling threatened.
I think the Buddhists in Arakan State and other parts of the country are being encouraged and almost to a point of hysteria to be afraid of Muslims, as though Muslims were about to overrun the country. And that imbalanced view has been something that has been promoted by the authorities through social media and mainstream media in the country. And I think it has been a handy way of trying to control the population, because this administration, although nominally civilian, has been putting through laws that actually have been quite repressive and dangerous to the local population. We're seeing a huge problem of land confiscation affecting the entire country, and this fear and hatred of Muslims, this anti-Muslim violence, is a very handy distraction from the reality and the economic reality and the human rights reality in Burma. And that's not even to mention the atrocities happening in Kachin State, because now nobody's talking about peace in Kachin State. They're just much more concerned about attacking Muslims.
Let me pose this question quickly to you, Zani. Is there an opportunity for reconciliation? Do you see any light on this? And what do you think needs to be done to start bringing about some sort of reconciliation?
No, reconciliation is not conceivable simply because the state, the military and the state, two most powerful institutions that are also intertwined or synonymous with each other, they rest on the anti-Muslim racist foundation. If you look at the Burmese armed forces, the armed forces have been cleansed of any Muslim or even Christian officers from any strategic positions. And this is done. This has been accomplished as a matter of policies over the past 50 years.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there.
When you have a state...
I apologize, I'm going to have to cut you off because we have run
that is
out
racist.
of time. There's Manzani saying that there's absolutely no chance for reconciliation. And Debbie Stoddart too, thank you so much for talking to us. Manzani ending there saying reconciliation is not possible. Thank you, and thank you to Debbie Stoddart, our guests on this discussion. And thank you very much for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. If you want, you can send us your feedback. Just email your thoughts to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. Thank you very much for watching. Bye-bye.